Okay, hello students and welcome to React 2. So far we've spent quite a bit of time with React. You guys have had a lecture on it and now you had also a full sprint on it where you built sort of a small to-do app. And what we were able to accomplish in that to-do app was this sort of idea of learning about the two different styles of components that exist in React, or that you can use in the React ecosystem. So one being the more um, like robust and sort of stateful component called the class component, and the other being more of a presentational component called the functional component. Now, just to reiterate on some of those topics, a class component is usually necessary when you need to pass some sort of state down and manage that state on that component and pass it down to a child component that receives that as props, which can be also another classical component, or it could also be just a simple presentational function component. So those are the two different types of components, just remember that. But now we're going to get a little bit into some more sophisticated data structuring. In our previous model, we were only using sort of this data format of, maybe just an array with, if you got a little bit into the extra credit, you're able to see, more sophisticated data with, an object of to-dos. So like you have this is your to-dos array, and each to-do maybe had like its own object where it was some sort of text here that you rendered out, and then maybe like a Boolean that was a true or false. And if you got to the full through the extra credit, this is where you were actually going to need to use a little bit more formal logic in order to render out a true or false um, to do. So, if the user goes and clicks that they actually um, completed their task in their to-do list, then this would render the opposite version of that. So, whatever the completed task was, this would return back this object. There are probably a couple of hiccups along the way for those of you who got this far. Some of those hiccups could have been how you're using the set state function. Some of those could have been how you're building your on change or on select handlers. But these are good hiccups to get to. And maybe some of you got to, just having a list of strings rendered to the DOM. And if you only got that far, that's great. What you've been able to learn from this sprint, if you got this far, is this list, this array of strings exists on the state of a parent object, and then you pass that down to a child object to render it out. So a child function or a child component would return a list item for every single item in this array. um, and you shouldn't capitalize your list items, but this would return out the string 1 and then string 2 in another list item, and so on and so forth. All right. So, for each element, so map over each element, and for each element, return each element as an li. So that was sort of um, a big principle. And what that taught you is sort of this idea of the data flow in React. So moving on to a little bit more about that data flow, there's a really great article included in the README for this mini project that you're going to go through in just a minute, written by Tyler McGinnis in his free React.js program that he had going on for a while. And I wanted to share with you this chart that he came up with to sort of display out and show you how the React lifecycle methods actually work, if and when you're actually going to be using these lifecycle methods. Now, I want to go ahead and do something here that may be a little controversial in React land, might not be. Um, but I want to go ahead and just say that we do not use getInitialState anymore when we're using our class keyword, okay? So, and the reason is this function has been replaced with the constructor. okay? So now we do everything inside this constructor function to set up our initial state. And then default props is also out of the React ecosystem now, so don't worry about those methods. Default props is a function that you could use to sort of select your props defaults. Now you do it in a little bit different way. So since we're not using the more out of date React.create class syntax as is found in this article, just know that we're using the new ES6 class syntax. So because of that, we don't have to use this create class method that React used to give us to tap into its lifecycle and build out its components. So your your syntax may look a little bit different from his, and don't let that bog you down. Just know that React has matured over the last couple of years, and this article was written in 2016. So it just goes to show that you're jumping into this awesome React library as it's continuously iterating and improving. All right, so if you look at this, this lifecycle method, what we have here is this node up here. He's demonstrating that React DOM exists. So inside of the React DOM render method, that's going to get called. And we're going to look for, remember we're skipping these, we're going to look for component will mount. Now React is looking for this. If component will mount exists, the next method that will be called is render. And render will simply return out our JSX into, what would be a div, right? So JSX to div, this is all happening in the React DOM. All right. And then what will then be called is this component did mount method. Now it's very common in the React ecosystem to see this method do some sort of data fetching. So maybe request some data with Ajax. And you're going to be doing a full entire sprint on Ajax here in just a couple of weeks. So for today, imagine that we have a file, a .js file that exists in your project, because we're going to give you this data. And we're going to be using your component did mount to basically fetch that data and then bring it into your state. So you can use this component did mount to call this .set state. And that should give you everything you need to return this data. Yes, so, okay, so we use set state to return a new object back to our original state object, okay? And I'm gonna get to that in just a minute, just to reiterate it and go over these things with you, okay? So what's cool about this little diagram is it's showing you the difference between basically two categories that you can break down the React lifecycle methods. And the two categories would be when a component is being mounted or unmounted. And this all comes from the article, so feel free to read over it and make sure if you're still unclear about the React lifecycle, just know it's something that you need to be doing a lot in your React applications in order to understand it. So it's not something that you can just understand from paper, most people don't learn that way. You need to actually do it. And the unfortunate thing today is in React applications, we're using an MVC type architecture it's not truly MVC, but this is sort of this BUZZ acronym, meaning Model View Controller, sort of way to organize your front end and server side applications. Now we use things like Redux or Flux to implement some sort of like overarching state management system. So because of that, it sort of takes away some of the advantage of using the React lifecycle hooks. But they're really important to know for anyone getting into React, because it's really good to see what they do. But just to piggyback off of that idea, we're not seeing them as much because of things like Redux that sort of abstract away these hooks. Now, I mentioned that they're only something that you're going to get more and more familiar with as you continue to build React applications. That is not going to be the case for like a Redux implementation to manage your state. And all of this is based on this idea of managing the state of your object or of your project. So if you have an application that you have state or an object that's going to just contain changes to that application, your object needs to, or your project needs to understand those changes and hold on to those changes and allow you access to manipulate those changes. Okay, and so just to finish this point, the React lifecycle methods, they all exist in updating or creating components in some way, and they give you the ability to access the state object that exists inside of your components that you build. You build this state object, so it's something that you build and React can hold on to and keep track of. But remember, there's the two categories: um, setting up and the, the taking down. So mounting and unmounting of your components, and then the updating of data throughout your components. So if your component updates in some sort of way, some sort of UI change needs to happen, then React can go, through your DOM tree and look through those changes. So if you have like a DOM tree that's, nested like this, this is the change that needs to take place. Object will, this React object will go through the entire life cycle and return out a new one. And it's going to go through this whole process of looking at these changes and being mounted and unmounted. Okay. All right, so that is basically all we have for you on the React component lifecycle for this course. Now, and the reason is because we're going to be moving into implementing and getting you guys exposed to this idea of Redux. But that's going to come in the next sprint, okay? So for this sprint, we need to be concerned with this lifecycle hook here and this lifecycle hook, this is something you're never going to get away from. You always need a render method to render out your class components, okay? If you're extending component from React, using the class syntax, you're going to have a render method. Otherwise, React won't know what to do with that component. Now, if you're simply presenting a JavaScript function, you don't need a render method. All you need to do is just simply return your JSX, okay? But for all classical methods, you need to have, or all classical components, you need to have this render method. And then for this idea of component did mount, we're actually going to be giving you guys a file that has a row of 50 sets of data, and you're going to have to consume that data, and you're going to use component did mount to do that. And I'm going to show you an example of how to do that in just a moment. Okay, so also for this this project that we're going to be getting into, you're going to be using what's called Create React App. Okay, so if you go and just take a look right out of the Facebook incubator Git organization, they have this Create React App graphical user interface, or command line interface. Okay, so it's a CLI. Sorry, I said GUI. It's actually a CLI because it's used in the command line. Now, how to get this installed on your machine is to simply go and run npm install -g create -react -app. Okay, so I've already run this program and I already have it up and running. So I'm going to now show you how to get a React app up and running without any headaches along the way. What Create React App does is it sort of abstracts away this build process of using Webpack, of using NPM and things like that. So you don't have to go and fetch all the dependencies you need. It uses this thing called React Scripts, which you'll learn just a little bit about right here. So React Scripts available. So you'll see when you get your React project that you have a list of scripts of dependencies, and one of those dependencies is called React Scripts. So we'll just do this right away, and I'll show you right now what happens. Okay, so I'm just in a folder called Lambda. It's where I keep all my Lambda School projects on my root. Okay, so you can see that that's where I'm at. So now all I'm going to do is just run create, because I've already ran the command npm install -g create React app. Okay, and it goes through the process of installing this command line interface into your console. Um, so now I can run create React app, and we're just going to call it my test app. So now what's cool is it's going to use this new thing in npm called yarn. Yarn is a new way to manage your npm packages. Okay, so you can go ahead and use yarn for your commands through this project and throughout the rest of the course, or you can use npm. Um, I like to use yarn in my personal projects just because there's a lot of added benefits to it. And I think it's a project that I think a lot of people are, sort of jumping on board with, and it's got a lot of really cool, useful tools. We won't go into those tools today, but just know there is a difference between Yarn and NPM, but Yarn uses NPM under the hood, and Yarn is sort of a new tool that's out there that a lot of people are using. Okay, so I've created my React app. Now I'm going to just check on it. So you can see that it installed it in this directory that I'm, currently CD'd into. So now I'm going to CD into that project and we're going to take a look at it. So if I just go ahead and list out the packages, we get a README, we get our node modules. It already went ahead and npm installed them for us. We get a package JSON, we get a public folder, an SRC folder, and then a yarn lock, which is just a file that you share between developers in your team that allows you to pull down and keep the changes synchronized that you guys are working on. So now if I open this up in my text editor of choice, which I don't think it's a surprise to you, to many of you that I use and I love VS Code, and we can take a look at these things that are installed here, okay? So first off, I'm going to look, as I do with all of my projects, in the package.json file. I want to see what dependencies I'm using, and I want to see what kind of scripts are available to me. Okay, so here in my package.json file, you can see I have React, React DOM, and React scripts. So React scripts is what I told you, sort of abstracting away that build step, that Webpack build step that you use to transpile your code and run tasks over your code to bundle them up. So this React project uses React scripts, okay? And it was built for the intention of using React app, create React app. And then I have a start command, which will start up my environment, a build command, which will build the environment all the way up to production use, and then a test command, which you can run tests over your code. We won't get too into these three commands, at least until later on in the course. And then eject will allow you to eject out of React scripts. It'll allow you to eject out of the create React app ecosystem and start building your project. And that's one thing that's really cool about create React app, is it gives you sort of a jump start, allows you to jumpstart a project, or bootstrap a project without much overhead. And then as your project evolves and gets more sophisticated, you can eject out of it to get other features that you may want to install and get into your app. So let's take a look at our SRC file. In here, we have an index.js, which takes our app and then dumps it out to the DOM. You're very familiar with this already. Then we have this register service worker file that you're not going to need to really worry about. If you want, you can go ahead and read over it. Okay. We have an SVG. That's pretty cool because they gave us a little animation with that SVG. We have an index.css file, which is going to be sort of available to you guys for styling for this sprint. And then we have an app.css file, which is going to show you how to use sort of modular styles. Okay. So if I go into app.js, you can see I'm importing my CSS file called app.css, and then now I can use them on these class names on my divs to style out my components. All right. So pretty standard, really basic React app. If I run a yarn or an npm start over this project, I'm just going to do a yarn start so you can see it in action. Okay. Now I have my React app built and created. So, and if you want to make sure that it's React, you can open up your dev tools, you can open up your React dev tools, and you can see that inside of React, I have a bunch of components. Well, I really just have my app component. So yeah, really cool jump starter project called Create React App. You're going to be using it for this sprint. All right. And then, okay, so let's head back into the code and let's actually look at what the meat and potatoes is. So you're going to be given a file that looks very similar to this one right here. You're going to be given a file called people, and it's going to have a bunch of data in it. And we're going to call it people.js so that we can export it as an object. And then I'm actually going to delete about 50 rows here. So you're only being given 50 rows. So I'm going to delete the last 50 and make sure I have the correct JSON syntax. Otherwise, this is going to blow up on me. Okay, so don't worry too much about what I just did there. I just deleted half of this data, and it's just mock data. But I'm going to prettify it using this JSON prettifier plugin. So now I can see it in a more friendly way. So this is sort of like the data that you're going to be seeing. This is exactly the data you're going to be seeing for the mini sprint. And it looks a lot like the data you're going to be seeing for the larger project. And this is very, very typical. This is pretty much what it looks like in the real world when you're working with, larger, more sophisticated data sets. We have this array that has a list of objects, and there's 50 objects in this array. And each object has a bunch of properties. And these properties are ID, first name, last name, the email of the person that we're familiar with here, their gender and their occupation, and then a list of friends, okay? So don't get too concerned about all the data here. Just know that we're gonna be using a very similar data set. So now I mentioned earlier that we were going to be talking about how to import this data into your file and then set it on state and use it. So Create React App gave us this awesome, cool starter stuff that we're actually just going to delete. And we're actually going to concern ourselves with a state object here. So we need our constructor function. Okay. And since we're extending component, we actually need to call super. So just to make sure that my project isn't broken, I'm going to make sure it's still here and I don't have any errors in the console. But I do have some lint warnings, which is nice because I can go ahead and delete this logo. Okay. Now we have our React app and it's just rendering out a single div and there's nothing on that div. That you can put an H1, say hello React app to make sure we're still there and check it out. We're good to go. And we got all these awesome fancy styles because of our app.css file. Either that or it's in our index.js file. Nope. So just know we have some good styles here. Text align center. Oh, and then it's just got the awesome. Yeah. So we have the body gives us a font family of sans serif. Okay. Cool. There's 0 margin padding. And then right here, we have a text align center. That's why our H1 tag is getting centerfied. All the rest of these, we don't need to worry about right now. So we can delete them. So that's inside the app file. Okay. I mentioned that we're going to be pulling in people. So let's do that right away. So let's concern ourselves with this, this constructor function, and let's actually create our people object, or our people array. So people equals array, and we're going to set that initially with component did. Okay, so component did mount is a function. It's a React lifecycle method. Okay, and we're actually going to pull in our people object. Now, I'm saying object because it's an array, but we're going to actually export this array as people. Let's see. Let's do this. Let's go export const people. Okay, so we've defined a people object, okay, or in a people array, and by saying const people equals an array, and we're exporting it out right away, okay? That's the same thing as saying const people, and then instead of exporting out the default, you would just say export people. And now, because of that, we're going to be looking specifically for, and there's probably a linter error. It wants, yeah. So because of this, it's going to be looking for a specific property. Oh my goodness, typos. It's going to be looking for a specific property called people. And I have some sort of typo, so, okay. So now inside of people, or inside of app, we can import our people object, which is an array of people. Okay. So as long as we don't have any errors in our console, we should be good. So now it's saying people is defined, but it's never used. So that's good. We actually have access to this people array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this.setState on our component did mount and say people becomes people. Now, I'm actually going to change the name of this people object here to be capital people just to help us distinguish the difference. Okay, so now when component did mount gets called, we should pull in all the people, and we should have a list of those people objects called people. Alrighty, so now let's go look at our console, and let's look at the state, and you can see we have all of our people. So now we're ready to play around with this stuff. So this is really fun. All right, so let's make a people list component that is simply going to be a presentational component. Actually, we're probably going to want to say, so people equals this.state.people, and this should kill my React app because people list component is not defined. So if you look in the server that you're running, you'll see it's not defined. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. First off, I'm going to import it. People list component. Let's just call it people list. And we're looking for an actual package here. Okay. Now we need to define this. So it's not defined, so we're going to say people list.js, and we're going to create an actual React component. So I need import React and component from React. Okay, this needs to be in quotes. All right, so now I can create my class. So people list extends component. Okay. And from here, I think I can just do something like export default to sort of simplify, do this all in one line. I know this is a lot to think about. Export default class component, or people list extends component. And all we're doing is creating a class called people list, extending our component, okay? And then we're exporting that class right there on the fly. So inside of our class, we now need our render method, okay? And that is going to return out some sort of JSX. So in here, we'll just put a div for now because we're not too concerned about what this looks like right now, but we will be in just a second. So every single div, we won't iterate or anything. We'll just say people list connected, okay? And then we're gonna get our constructor function. This one is going to be receiving props. So because of that, we need to pass the props back up to component. That's what you're doing. The object that you extend, when you call super, whatever comes in, you pass it back up to component. So not only can this people list be delegated its properties from component, or for example, in this instance, have access to the React lifecycle methods, we can also basically set these properties on component as well. So now we call our state object, and I'll show you why we need this in just a second. I thought initially that I just wanted to render a list of people, but now I'm really concerned about every single person's friends array. So every single person in our object is going to have a friends array, and that's why I had to do it this way. So now I need to come into our app.js and fix our errors and call this people list. Okay, we compiled successfully, so let's head back over and let's take a look at our people list. So inside of here, we have some sort of problem, okay, because we don't have anything over here on props yet. All right. So, but we're expected to be seeing these people that get passed down to the people list. So let's go find out where our typo is, and I see it right away. The typo is right here on. We didn't have a capital P. That's the P that we're referencing here that gets set in our component did mount from set state. Okay, so now we need to reference it and pass it down. So now inside of people, I can see that I have all my people available as props on my object or on my component. Okay, so now here's where the fun starts to begin, if you weren't having fun already. So this is actually, I'm going to backtrack here. I'm going to take this people list and I'm going to actually use it as an example of not thinking fully through my data. Because if I look at my data, each individual person is going to be a full object, and they're going to have a list of friends as an array on each object. So every object, every person object has a friends list, and we want to be concerned with this list later on down the road. We don't need to worry about it now. So I'm actually going to refactor this people list component. I'm going to take this data here. I'm just going to save it to my clipboard, and I'm actually going to say just import React. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to export const people list as a function instead. And that's because all I'm concerned about with this is maybe rendering out each individual person and then letting the person be responsible for the friends list, as opposed to what I was planning on doing earlier. So now we have our props that come in, and then we're just going to now return a single JavaScript JSX element, which is going to be a people, a person. We just are going to have a div, okay? And then every single div is going to map over our props.people, or not every single div. This is just going to be, yeah, so this is going to be created, and this is going to create our list of people now. So we're going to say props.people.map, and I'm going to call each person, okay? And then I want to just simply return another div that takes, no, we're actually going to be returning our person object. That's what we wanted to do. Now, each one of these is just going to be now involved with an individual person. Okay, so we'll say, yeah, and then each one needs its own individual key. So I'm going to say person.id because we have an ID on this object. Okay, now get really familiar with looking over your data and figuring out what you have available to you. All right, so person is not defined. React is blowing up at us. Okay, so we need to define it. And we're just going to take what we had there and paste it. Oh, I copied and pasted. Okay, so I'll just have to redo this. So import React and component from React. Whoa. Okay, and now we're going to say export default class um, person extends component, and then that's just a giant object. Okay, and we have our constructor method, which is going to take in our new props, right? And we're going to have to super back the props, okay? And then call this dot state, set it equal to an object. And on here, we're going to have, by the time it gets here, each person is just going to be an object. So this is going to get rendered out multiple times as our list iterates over these things. So now outside of our constructor, we can call render, and we can say return a JSX element, and just right now we'll just say a div. Actually, let's go all the way. Let's go all the way to town. We're going to say this.state.person.name. So to make sure that's defined, we need our component did mount function. And that is going to take every single person that comes down from props, and it's going to set it on that object that's up here on state. So we're going to say this.setState person equals this.props.person. Okay, and the reason we're doing it in right here inside of our setState function inside of component did mount is because that's gonna be called, and no matter what, props will be defined at that point. If we did it in component would mount, it could be a race condition where the props weren't defined. But here, person is going to be defined every single time. Because we call a render method, we start that lifecycle method or lifecycle chart that I showed you earlier. I left the page, and then pushed it up in that instance. Okay. So now we should have person available to us. It looks like we have an error over in our people list. So let's go over to our people list and make sure we export the default. And it doesn't like that. So we actually, it's where we're defining it in app, I believe, that we have the problem. So our people list needs to not be a default object because it's a function. So now we should have a compiled list, and it's going to be a bunch of things separate. So if we look at our page, we actually have our list of elements. But look, so every single time it iterates, we're returning a new person. And then that person just has on state and on props the same stuff available to it. So this is great. This is exactly what we need. So for this, we can now take a look, and we're consuming this data, and I'm actually trying to render out person.name, and looking at this data, it's person.firstname or last name that we have access to. So let's go back to the code, and let's make sure that I'm doing this correctly. So inside every single person, it's going to be person.firstname or person.lastname. So now we get a list of all the people in our objects, okay? So kind of powerful stuff there. Now I'm going to show you sort of how to lay this out in a better way. So what I want to do is create a person.css file, and I'm going to say we have our person wrapper is going to be a class, okay? And it is going to say display flex. Okay, so this is Flexbox. Flexbox is a really powerful paradigm, a really powerful layout tool. And for every single item, we're going to say flex direction gets column. And this is not JavaScript anymore, so I'm used to writing my CSS as JavaScript. And then we're just going to give it a little bit of padding with justify content and say space around. Okay, and then so that's going to be every single person, and let's give it a height and a width. So each height, we're just going to make each person like a square of maybe 250 pixels, and the same thing for our width. and then we can adjust later, okay? So now if I go and I actually import this person.css file in, um, let's see how they're doing it inside of index, just to make sure that I'm keeping it fluid. So you see all they're doing is just importing that file, and now it's gonna say, React script knows how to look for the CSS file and compile it. So I can just say import person.css, and I should now be able to give this div a class name of, what we want to do is say, what do we call it in the person wrapper? Pretty terrible name, but I'm not very good with semantic things. So this actually needs to be in quotes. Um, so we use class names because the class keyword is now a reserved keyword in JavaScript, and because of that, um, we're working in JavaScript. We're not working in HTML right now because we're working in JSX land. So they use this word class name instead, camel case. All right. So now I can say, no, each first name is, let's give it, a good layout here. So let's give it an H3, and let's do the same for the person's last name. Okay, and let's now do the same for each person's email, but let's do the email in just a paragraph tag. So this dot state dot person dot email, and then we can do a bunch of other things in just a minute. So now you can see we have kind of a nicer well, it's not as nice yet. And so each card is a little bit big. So I actually want to update this and change some of the CSS. So let's look at how we can fix some of this stuff. So every single one of these gets its own person wrapper, and then H3. So let's go and let's say, let's tone it down a bit. Oh, because each person wrapper is its own element. So what I want to do is I want to wrap these all in their own div so the content can sort of fit the paradigm, and we're spacing out the content a little better. So because of that, now I mean, it's a little big. And so let's go down and play around with the height and width on the person.css file. So let's just say instead of 150, we do 100 pixels in height, and maybe we keep the same width. So now it's starting to look a little bit better, but I don't like the way our H3s are laid out. So I'm actually going to create those as divs themselves. And then I'm just going to say, I'm going to give it each of these a class name. And each class name, we'll just call this name header. Okay. So now I can take this into my CSS file, and I can actually sort of start playing around with some of the fonts and weights. So let's say that I wanted a font size of maybe, I'm going to go 18 pixels to start. And I'm going to give it a font weight because I think that the font weight that is a little bit ridiculous. So we'll give it a font weight of 300. And let's see. Oh, I have a typo. Thanks, VS Code. So font weight looks a little better there. We can start to lay out each one of these things here. Okay. So now let me get to the meat and potatoes of this sort of larger data set. And I'm going to do email title. And I'm going to give it just a smaller font weight, or the same font weight, but I'm going to give it a font size of 16 pixels. And I'm going to apply this to a div tag on. When in doubt, just use div, right? That's kind of been my personal rule of thumb. Don't quote me on that, though. There may be some people who would disagree with that in the industry. I'm not too concerned. because a lot of what you do in CSS, you sort of just pick up on the job as you go. Um, so now it's not quite small enough for my taste. I'm going to bring it down to, let's say, 13 pixels. So there's a drastic change. So now Susie Clayton, okay, and let's actually move this content. Let's justify this content so it looks a little bit better. Let's justify it. Center justified is fine, but you can notice what Flexbox gives us, which is kind of what you're going to be using for this sprint. You're going to be using Flexbox to lay out your JavaScript objects in a very nice fashion. So what this gives us is an automatic sort of spacing. So every single one of these, we have flex direction column. If I did row here instead, you know, bumped out the height and weight, oh, it's inheriting from other places. So it's hard to do flex in line because I'd have to do a bunch of other tweaks with this stuff. But yeah, you can do a space between, keep this back to column. And there's a whole like world of new layouts. So you can see how it's nice and friendly here. So I have a height and width of 100 and 250. Now these items are all sort of like, sort of center justified, or they're not center justified, but they're aligned in a column, nice and, you know, friendly. So let's center justify them, center align them to the middle of the screen here. And how we're going to do that is we're going to use this div that, you know, oh, it's saying text align center. So we can look at app and we can say div.app, and we can find out what we can do to maybe justify this content into the center here. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna take Flexbox away from this person wrapper, and I'm only gonna give it a height and width. So when I go into people list, I have this div that I can say class name equals, you know, our individual like person element. So I'm gonna call this, you know, I'm gonna call this one person wrapper, and then we actually, and then I'll go and refactor the other one to be like each individual person. So what I'll say is import, and then find that a new CSS file called people list.css. Okay, since we're laying them out in a list, now I need to create this file. And I'm going to find people wrapper gets those elements. So now all I need to concern myself with is inside of person, the CSS. I'm just going to do individual person. It just gets the height and width. And then I'm going to pass that in and say this is just person. And now I should have a little bit more control over how my elements are laid out. So you can see now I have this list, this person wrapper in here. Let's make sure that I'm importing and doing everything just right, because it looks like I'm not quite there. So with my people list, we're going to call person wrapper, and I think maybe I named it wrong. Yeah, I called it people wrapper. So we can actually use this one. I like the name a little better. So now you can see that we have people wrapper and we have our display. Okay, so if you look, we can go around and start playing now with how our layout should look. You can do things like, if you just have like your display flex, it's going to put everything in a row, and then you can use flex wrap. It's going to, you know, sort of break the page as you go. So flex wrap is really powerful if you're using just like a row-based content. But yeah, for this one, we kind of wanted to, instead of use wrap and flex, we wanted to use our column, because you're going to be laying it out piece by piece like that. So now let's get into sort of more of the nuts and bolts of what we're going to be working on. And this is sort of something you should already know about, is kind of what we've accomplished and come after so far. But now we want to look at what happens when you have, like I said, this nested data set. So if I look in here, in each individual person, I have access to a friends object, okay, or a friends array. So we actually want to display a list of these friends, all right? So what we're going to do is we're going to create a friends list. And I'm going to actually now sort of piece around our data. I'm going to say friends for every single person is going to be an array that we can play with and manipulate and put that on state. So as we pull in our person data, I'm going to set it equal to this dot props dot person dot friends. So now if we look at our state, as we render out every single one of these people, so each person is going to now have on state a friends list. And poor Baxi only has one friend, but that doesn't matter because we're going to make a fun little friends list component that we can import in. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So import friends, friends from friends. And before everything breaks, I'm just going to go and create it right now on the fly. So friends gets JavaScript object, and we're going to import React from React. And this is going to be a presentational component. It's going to maybe receive some props, maybe a click handler or something. But for now, we're just going to give it go for it as a presentational component. And I can just say export const friends equals presentational functional component. And that's going to receive props as an argument that come in as props. And then we're going to return out some JSX. So each friend is going to be by its own right, maybe its own div. Okay. And now we can start to see the power of some of this stuff. So props.friends.map every single individual friend in the list. So maybe for now we just do an unordered list because we can start there and then move forward. And so we don't need a div. We're just going to make it an unordered list, and every single friend in that array is going to be okay. And so you should be able to just iterate over these friends now. So and every single friend, we're going to return out a list item that gets a friend dot first name in the list item. And maybe we go a little bit deeper and say inside of every single list item, there's not only a friend dot first name, but we're concerned with their last name as well. So we'll put that in a p tag, paragraph tag, and then we'll do the same thing for, and remember, I think it's going to be first name, maybe not. Let's check our data before we go down that rabbit hole. It's first name and last name. Those are what we're worried about. So, and it's camel case, not kebab case or whatever you want to call that. Whoops. Okay, so now we should have all the friends. Okay, this is great. Cannot resolve friends. Okay, let's check out this error. So cannot resolve friends. Oh. Okay, let's see if that was a big typo. Okay, and then I already see the typo. If I go to my people or each one of my person, so I'm going to get rid of all these other tabs and bring up friends again. Okay, and I'm going to say so in here, cannot resolve friends. 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 Where am I doing this? Export const friends. I have a typo somewhere. Oh, from friends. Why am I calling it that? It's yeah. Now that I look at the word, I'm very confused as to how it's spelled. This is awesome. So okay, cool. So you look at something over and over again, and it's like, what in the world is this? So, um, all right. So we have import friends from friends. Oh, and because we're not doing a default, it's got to be like this. Okay. Okay. Still can't resolve it. All right. So I found the typo, and it was this. I didn't have a dots forward slash in front of the name. So now, so yeah, I was not exporting it or importing it as a component that exists within my application. I was trying to find it from Node, and it's like, it doesn't exist in Node, dude. So, okay. So this friends list, we can now look over, and I changed the name to friends list, so it's a little bit more verbose. So now it should be, oh, we've got, cool. So we've got an error. We're gonna go fix this right now. So from friends list JS6, it doesn't know what, let's see what it says. So props.friends.map, and then every single friend. So let's do this. Let us take this function out of the equation for a second and just console.log our props. So now in the console, we should see a bunch of friends, and they're all undefined. So there's a problem here. Okay, let's debug this. Oh, I have a typo. So that's going to be why. All right, and then take this. Should exist. We're getting each child in an array. Okay, so we have a React warning here that's talking about every single child in the array of every single iterator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to put a special key reference here so that React um, knows what to do with this. And I'm just going to simply say the index at which each one of these is found. Actually, that's not going to work. I'm going to say the friend dot first name plus the friend dot last name to just be like concatenate them together as a string, and it's going to be individual object based. And then I have some issues with my styling that I noticed before we went back to that page. So I'm going to go back to every single individual person, and I'm going to take out the height, and just so that yeah, inside of every single person now we have a list of names, and they all look so it's a first and last name per person. So I'm actually going to need to style this so it looks a little better. So I hope you can see the pattern here. Also, let's say friends. So I want to say for every single li, first off we want to decorate it. So each friend, let's say each friend, let's say okay, so let's say font size is not so big. And let's go with a standard like 12-point font, 12 pixels here. And then font weight, let's bump it down to 200. It's a little bit less important than the other title of each friend. And yeah, that should help us out quite a bit. It's inheriting a bunch of styles from our original style sheet. So now instead of friends list, I can import in um, make sure we're not trying to pull from Node. And then every single one of these LIs should get a class name that says, um, sorry, don't need that. We want to say friend. Friend list. So it looks a little better, but it's not quite where we want it. Let's see if this is even hooking up the right way. So every single friend, so we're getting overwritten endowed property value. Oh, it's a string. Once again, I'm used to writing my CSS in JavaScript. So it looks a little better, but we could do better. So now you see this. It's kind of a cool way to basically show out all this stuff. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have some sort of click handler, and just tie everything together real quick. Um, well, no, I'm actually not going to do that. So okay, I am. I'm gonna do this. It's gonna be fun, and it's worth. If you want to stick around with me right now, you can. If not, you can go ahead and just move on to your mini sprint. And that mini sprint is going to be called React to Mini. So we'll get that out to you, and you guys can just go ahead and work on it. If you want to stick around and see something really fun, um, check out this. Little fun feature here that we're going to add. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually hide this unordered list. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to create a class name, and I'm going to set it equal to a Boolean or a ternary operation. Okay, so if props dot show friends is defined, yeah, then if it is true, then show then we want this UL's class name to be friends list. Else, we're going to show just an empty string as our class name. Okay. So now if we look at this, we can see our friends list is an unordered list, and it just has a class on there with nothing assigned to it. Okay. So what we want to do is want to be able to toggle these friends. So I'm going to say on click and set that equal to a function that calls a props.showFriends handler, okay? And we're going to define this up above inside each individual person. So showFriends handler is going to be a function that's going to toggle the individual friends list, okay? And we'll send an object in, okay? And then let's just console.log that object for now and see what we get out of it. And then we need to pass this down as show friends handler, this dot show friends handler. And then we're also going to pass down that Boolean that we're going to define. And then we can do that in just a second. For now, we're just going to leave it like this. And then we need to bind this to our constructor. Okay. And then from down in here in our friends list, we can call, so we can wrap this in an anonymous function so that it can just be called when the item is clicked. And then we can call props.showFriendHandler and pass it props.person. Sorry, we're worried about friends here. Each friend. Okay, so it's just going to toggle the state of each one of these friend lists here. All right. So now if we nothing should have changed except for we should have in our React app, if you look at our friends list, we should have a couple of new props here. We should have this show friends handler, and then when you click, it should pass back up. Okay, so we're not actually getting that friend row right away. So, and I'm going to debug it and figure out why. So I refactored this to make it work so that instead of returning a list element for every single, inside a big giant unordered list, it's going to return a full-on unordered list inside of a div. So that way we actually have access to each friend that we iterate over. And then also it keeps it a little bit more modular and separate from the other concerns that we're concerned about with this component. It's just a way to clean up my code and make it a little bit more concise, a little bit more friendly to what we're doing. So yeah, later on we'll go and we can update some other things. But now if I click on each individual friend, and you can see that this key needs to be defined up here on the UL instead because yeah, we're going to be iterating over every single one of these. So we should see, yep, each friend in that unordered list, and then each one is its own unordered list of friends. So now if I click on the unordered list, I actually have a bug, and it's because I'm trying to pass up props.friend instead of just every single friend. So now let's see, if I click on here, that friend is that, and then that friend is just that one. So now we can do things, like use this data to pass it back up. And what I was gonna do is only show this unordered list for every element, but the way that I've architected this is not gonna allow me to do that. So for now, you have enough ammo to continue through this project to go and build this now from scratch and do it with Create React Apps so you get familiar with those principles, and then try and consume that data as much as you can. And that data we're going to have available for you in that people file. And then there's going to be steps in the README that show you how to include that into your app. Now, this was a pretty long-winded conversation because there's a lot to tackle every time we talk about React. Because sometimes you look at it and you're like, well, why would he be doing something like this? And the answer to that is because one, there's paradigms that exist within React that allow you to, create things in a very succinct, organized way. And then there's like a lot of non-standard ways to do things. And it's because JavaScript allows you to like create things, and React is so lightweight as far as like its API. You get a lot of fun stuff to do out of the box that you can do with just vanilla JavaScript. And so take what you can from this and try and apply it into the mini sprint. And I promise you guys are gonna have a lot of fun. So, all right. I hope everything was great for you. I hope you guys have an awesome mini sprint, and we'll talk to you later.